Today on the show, we're chatting about the local stories that mattered most this week. Boise State Public Radio's George Prentice and our Hey Boise newsletter editor Blake Hunter are here to round up the stories behind the headlines. From abortion bills and legislative efforts to control Boise to the abrupt departure of a city council member, there's lots to talk about. It's Friday, January 20th, 2023. I'm Frankie Barnhill, filling in for Emma Arnold, and this is CityCast Boise. George and Blake, thanks so much for being here. We have so much to talk about, so much news this week. So let's get right into it, starting with the legislature. Bills are starting to be debated. A big sigh. Bills are starting to be debated. You know, the first couple of weeks, it's kind of rules and things getting set up. But now we're actually seeing some of these bills come out. And Blake, specifically this week, we saw two bills about abortion in the Senate, which is not surprising. But at the same time, there's some nuances here that are kind of interesting. Both of those bills came from Senator Scott Herndon, and one did not advance to the next stage, but another one will advance to the next stage. So, right. Blake, what's in that bill, the one that's going to advance?
Yeah, so basically this bill, the intention of it, according to Senator Herndon, was redefining kind of abortion within the Idaho, I guess it wouldn't be the Constitution. It's actually an amendment to the No Public Funds for Abortions bill that was from a couple of years ago, one of the abortion bans. And so basically his account of it is that he talked to a lot of healthcare people who were concerned about treating things like ectopic pregnancies and things like that. And so he basically redefined abortion as being intentionally killing a fetus or an embryo while it is in utero. So an ectopic pregnancy is when the embryo or the fetus is outside of the uterus, and so it is just not going to be viable. And so treating that is no longer defined or no longer could be kind of construed to be an abortion. And then the other thing that goes in with that is just that if the fetus dies in utero as well, that removing it does not count as an abortion.
Right. And of course, the backdrop is that we have an abortion ban that, criminalizes medical providers who would be providing an abortion. However, there is this exception, but it sounds like he thinks, and he heard from people who said this was murky and that they felt uncomfortable or like, they could be actually taken to court because of the definition here of what counts as an abortion.
Yeah, which certainly makes sense because, we have, 3 bans? All of the language, they're kind of overlapping. The language can obviously be pretty confusing. It's also, they're mostly written by legislators who, as this amendment kind of shows, don't really understand healthcare. They are not required to understand healthcare. And so, I think it's very reasonable for people to be scared about it, especially because the penalties for violating those bans is like tens of thousands of dollars in fines, several years in prison. I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but...
And potentially losing your medical license too.
Of course, yeah.
So do we know what abortion access advocates are saying about this bill?
Well, it's kind of interesting, actually. I feel like a lot of this bill in particular and like a few others really moved quickly this week with not a lot of public feedback or kind of commentary at the State House, which, again, I understand because going to the Capitol is a real privilege. It, focuses on people who live in Boise who may also be more privileged and, be able to go to the Capitol and, spend time outside of work doing that. But I think that maybe there's a bare minimum of people being glad for the clarification around ectopic pregnancies. But in a large part, these are still really, really strong bans that people are not happy about on the pro-abortion, pro-choice side of things.
Yeah, that's a great point, Blake. And I guess, George, just in general, this bill, the next step, as I understand it, or before it would reach the Senate floor for debate, is there would be opportunity for a public hearing. Is there going to be opposition that will actually mount a defense to any of these abortion bills? Or we know it's a supermajority of conservatives who have really strong feelings against abortion.
Well, the skeptic in me is definitely thinking this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Indeed, we heard from healthcare providers in 2022 saying they were really troubled, if not threatened, by existing anti-abortion laws. And Herndon floated this bill in front of Senate State Affairs, basically saying, oh, yeah, well, I've been talking to these healthcare providers. But, I mean, he has shown his hand, if you will, because minutes before, he also proposed a bill that would not allow any exceptions for incest and or rape. My sense is that this is inching toward personhood. And as he proposes his bills, and I have no doubt if it does make its way to the floor, the word murder is going to be dropped more than a few times. I'm just a little skeptical about this particular bill, and I think that it is designed to basically keep pro-choice folks off balance, if you will, because indeed they do want exceptions for healthcare providers, but they want a heck of a lot more exceptions than this ever provides.
That's fascinating. I mean, playing devil's advocate, like, isn't it fair to say that this is probably the most that abortion access advocates in Idaho can hope for at this stage, given the politics? Possibly,
but if indeed, I would call his bluff. First of all, who are you talking with, Mr. Bonner County? Who are you talking with? I would be curious if he could not name institutions or groups or even names, because every healthcare provider I have talked to, and I've talked to more than a few than Bonner County could ever count, and they need a heck of a lot more protections than this. So if, Senator Herndon, you're saying you're talking to healthcare providers, I'm going to guess that they'd be the first to tell you that this doesn't come anywhere close to the protections that they're asking for from, quite frankly, prosecution.
George, you're absolutely right. I mean, try to point out something in the State House that's going to stop this bill and even more from just kind of moving forward with very little resistance. I just don't think it's going to happen. But on the grassroots level, tomorrow on Saturday, there's a big kind of pro-life, anti-abortion choice rally that's happening. And then there's also a rally that's happening in opposition to that. And that was originally started by, I'm forgetting her name right now, but the woman who went really viral on TikTok, who a few weeks ago was pregnant and having some serious complications and going to multiple hospitals in Idaho and could not get treatment. She's kind of coming into the public light for the first time, really, in person at least. And so on the grassroots level, there is actually quite a bit of resistance going on. I think that people are actually learning more about their options and what options they have. But there is actually movement going on just in other places outside of the Capitol.
That TikTok series from that woman was really, really tough to watch. But we'll find it and link it in the show notes for anybody who's curious to know what that was.
And she's doing great now. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Well, George, I mean, sticking with the legislature, you've followed the legislature for decades. You've seen things come and go, and the politics move. You know, there's this House bill also. So we were in the Senate. Now we're talking about the House. And Blake's actually written about this in our Hey Boise newsletter. And this is around basically tying abortion and tax revenue, and specifically to Boise and what Boise can expect from the legislature for tax revenue. George, I'd love you to talk about that a little bit. But first, actually, Blake, could you just remind us what exactly was in this and who brought this forward? What's going on here?
So this was brought forward by a NAMPA representative, Bruce Skog. Essentially, what this bill would do is remove any cities from access to sales tax revenue, which is appropriated through the state, if they signal that they will not comply with Boise or with Idaho's abortion bans. So essentially, last summer, after Roe v. Wade, Boise said that it would not be sending funds towards investigating people for pursuing abortions.
Yeah, they said they would not prioritize.
Prioritize, correct. Yeah. And essentially, Skog is saying that he doesn't want cities who say that to be able to still have sales tax revenue, which I believe is about 8% of the city's budget. And Boise is the only city to have said something like that in the state so far.
George, what are your thoughts on this whole thing?
Yeah, I've got so many thoughts. But for the record, Representative Bruce Gog, he's first in line of the chorus of, okay, what legislation can we basically target Boise with? And that's what they're doing, is they're targeting Boise. And how do you do that? You do that by crippling a budget. And by the way, what we're talking about here is going after healthcare providers, right? Boise is basically saying that they're not going to prioritize their police department by going after doctors and, healthcare providers who are providing emergency care. By the way, there are no abortions taking place in Idaho with the exception of extreme emergencies. So in a state where Bruce Gog and many of his colleagues would say, oh my goodness, we have a crime problem, we have a drug problem, and yet they're anxious to put our law enforcement muscle against healthcare representatives. So what was interesting about this particular bill in committee on Wednesday, the pro-life folks were out in numbers and testifying in favor of this bill, and only one person testified against this bill. Folks, you can testify online. I'm not saying how to testify, when to testify, or even if to testify, but legislation, any type of legislation is crafted, is moved, etc., usually when people show up.
Yeah, George, I think it's just so interesting to see again and again. We've seen this over and over again, but this particular iteration of the legislature focusing in on Boise. Now, of course, Boise's not named in Representative Skogg's bill, but it's very clear that that's what it's targeting, that's Boise's the only city that has one of these resolutions. And it's just, fascinating to see this new level of focus on an attack against Boise and its politics.
Can I give you one more? Something that has just surfaced?
Yeah, absolutely.
A new piece of legislation has just surfaced that would prevent any state agency or department to make a donation to any nonprofit that has and basically what this is specifically, it's targeting donations that have come from the Department of Health and Welfare for the Pride Festival. So here it is again.
Yeah. And I guess I just want to also point out that, of course, at this stage, it's just a few weeks into the legislature, but so far it seems as though the focus of these bills that have surfaced so far have been mostly around the culture wars that we know a lot of the right wing especially has made their bread and butter. But what about the bills to, do things that Idahoans really need and really want? And maybe, Idahoans on both sides of the aisle, like property tax relief. What other bills we're waiting for other stuff, right?
This is how Herndon got elected. Keep in mind, he's a freshman, and yet he has floated more legislation in the House and the Senate than any other legislator in either body in the first couple of weeks. He unseated a veteran Republican in last year's GOP primary in the Panhandle, and he campaigned from the far right. He came in with a social agenda, and quite frankly, in the past, the state Senate was a bit of a firewall, but the state Senate is turning harder to the right, and that's why you're seeing some of this legislation being proposed in the Senate first. Pieces of legislation like this never would have started in the Senate. If they can pass through the Senate, it's a fair bet it will pass easily in the House.
Let's pivot specifically to City Hall now. Blake, another thing that you've been following in our Hey Boise newsletter is the unexpected news that Lisa Sanchez, who's was expected to run for another term on Boise City Council this year, is no longer on the council. What the hell happened?
Yeah. Some important context here is that Lisa Sanchez was the only renter on the council. And she had an apartment in the North End, and she was notified, I think she said the day after Thanksgiving, that her lease would be ending on December 31st. Anyone who's rented in Boise in the last couple of years knows how difficult it can be to find a place. She had about 5 weeks to find somewhere. She has repeatedly said that she talked to city staff, the appropriate city staff, once she found a place that she wanted to move to. Everything seemed lined up. And then she found out that this new place that she was living was outside of her district. And part of the state code says that anyone who lives outside of their, moves outside of their district their seat is vacated. And so that happened this week. Holly Woodings, the new council president, came forward and said that she was no longer in her position. So that is an entirely open seat now. And the Mayor McLean announced this week that Boiseans can begin applying for that seat. And Elaine Cleggs, who has been on city council for, I think, almost 30 years and is leaving for a different position. So there are very soon to be 2 open seats on the council. Yeah, kind of a real mess. I really feel for her. Also, just as a renter myself, I'm damn, I mean, I get it.
Yeah. 5 weeks to find a place. I don't know if I've found a place in 5 weeks.
Yeah, I did last year and it was horrible.
Yeah. It's really, really, obviously really, really challenging. There's a lot still we're not totally sure what Lisa Sanchez knew at what point, or did she know, or how this exactly happened, because it seemed as though, of course, she wanted to keep her seat, obviously. But of course, the background context, once again, to bring it back to the legislature, because we can't escape talking about the legislature, is that this whole districting thing in the first place, that Sanchez had to be within the district, that didn't exist when she was first elected to office. The legislature created a law that affected Boise that meant that the city council had to be parceled out by district as opposed to being an at-large council. So that is part of this whole conversation, right? George, what are your thoughts on this story?
Well, it gets real personal real fast. I know that Lisa Sanchez was hoping to stay with someone that would have kept her in her district for a transition period. That did fall apart. And all of this was in a matter of days, if not hours, at the end of the year, beginning of this. And so,
which around the holidays and everything, makes it so much more complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there was that extra wrinkle. It wasn't even, a matter of weeks. It was a matter of hours and days. And so if she could find a place in her district, that would be swell. Keep in mind that a person must reside in their district a minimum of 30 days to even apply for a placement as a council person. So there's that. Now, Elaine Clegg's seat. Elaine Clegg has been hired by Valley Regional Transit to be their new director. She starts February 13th, but she said she would stay on the council until, sometime in the near future. We still haven't gotten the date from her or the council. My guess is the mayor and the council would love for her to stay a little longer, but okay, look, if we're going to take applicants, let's have at it. The person who does fill Elaine Clegg's seat when Elaine Clegg leaves, that's an at-large seat. It will only remain at-large until November. Again, that seat will be thrown to the wolves as well. That will be part of districting. So basically, you're going to have a council person per district. Whether Lisa Sanchez emerges again, I think it's just a matter of when. I don't think it's a matter of if. I think that she will tell a stranger how committed she is to her work at City Hall. And I think that she will do everything and anything to run again, and if possible, to be appointed again.
Yeah. And I guess to put a fine point on the sad irony of this, as council person, Lisa Sanchez put a spotlight on renters and the plight of renters and the issues surrounding our housing crisis as it relates to renters. And to see her lose her seat because her lease expired unexpectedly and she needed to find a place quickly. Talk about irony.
Yeah, she's the only person of color on the council, too.
Absolutely. The city council is losing an important voice. Like her or don't like her, Elisa Sanchez matters. And she has been targeted more than any other political person in the Valley in recent memory, and she has emerged victorious time and again as voters have said, yes, please. So I fully expect her to return to the political arena, and she will campaign as good as anyone.
George, sticking in City Hall, a slightly different story. There's so many stories coming out of City Hall right now. You are having conversations around the ongoing police scandal. What's standing out to you from your conversations with officials?
Well, the way I approached it, I always have to ask myself, well, what do I have to add to this conversation? Because goodness knows the issue of Ryan Lee being asked to resign, and then less than 2 months later, the issue of a former police captain, Matt Bringleson, a social media person, puts a spotlight on his other life, if you will, and him buttressing racist ideologies. And no one at City Hall or at the police department is saying that they had any clue about this. Well, that'll be interesting to see if this investigation does surface anything. But I want to talk more about trust and the fact that trust has been damaged and has been damaged twice in a very short amount of time. And how does the Boise Police Department earn that trust back? And then I'm curious about the trust within the rank and file that they will not be targeted in a witch hunt. And then you have to ask the question, how do you recruit in this environment? Where do you find better cops? How do you find better cops? Why, does anyone even want to be a cop in America in 2023? And goodness knows, Boise is on a very long list of American cities with issues, right? When it comes to law enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pause really fast on the on interim Chief Weiniger, who now is going on how many months being interim and with no real end in sight, right? So what did he say around the question of, how did this captain, former captain Matt Bringleson, having a leadership position within the department and being a member of the department for many, many years, how did this person with this ideology that was a white supremacist ideology exist? And also, how could it be that someone in this position would not have in some way rubbed off on, had influence over other folks considering his leadership position? What did he say to that?
I used the word infected in my question, and he bristled at that. And I reminded him that it was the investigative committee that used the word, I wasn't the first to use the word infected. But their answer, whether it's at City Hall or whether it's One Police Plaza, their answer is, I don't know. We don't know. But I don't know about you, but every conversation I've had around town for the last month or so has been, you've got to be kidding me. It's ridiculous. What are you saying that you don't know? They all know of him. And by the way, you can type in the name Matt Bringleson and you can find all kinds of stuff about him and how the police department put him in the storefront window as a really good cop and really engaged in the community, et cetera.
Yeah, he hosted BPD's podcast, if I'm not incorrect on that. Yeah, Blake, what are your thoughts on this whole ongoing scandal? I know you're following it closely too.
Yeah, I understand that there's the element of an actual investigation, but we've got to stop pretending that we don't know that police aren't like there are just so many studies showing that law enforcement is indeed, I think infested is a good word, with white supremacist ideology and lots of far right militia group members in law enforcement. And of course, you do have to be careful in these investigations and actually finding and identifying people, identifying specific actions. But we've just got to drop the pretense a little bit, I think.
Do you think, George's conversations are around this question of trust? How do you think Boiseans are feeling about trust right now with BPD?
Well, if you think about Matt Bringleson saying all this racist stuff, the people that are going to be most affected by that are not, white, wealthy Boiseans. And the people who are not white, wealthy Boiseans, mostly communities of color, immigrant communities and stuff like that, do not already have a lot of trust. So, I mean, that's kind of, I guess, what I mean by like, we've got to drop the pretenses. Like, just listen to those communities. They're already saying that they don't trust BPD.
And I would just add to that they also, I believe, have a problem with those folks who are privileged, who are questioning
of course,
the police department. So you've got a problem across the board here as far as trust and erosion of trust. And whether you're building it from zero or rebuilding it, we have an issue of trust. And we have to acknowledge that. And I think, again, it comes back to recruitment and reflecting a police force that reflects the community. And that's really, really hard, by the way. It's really hard. But that means, pardon me, here comes the word, quotas. But that's, maybe there's a better word for it. But for goodness sakes, until we can reflect our community, then you're at a disadvantage.
Well, I want to wrap up with something totally different. This is a question that I heard from a colleague recently talking about the love of their city. So here's the question. What's something that's happened to you recently that made you feel love for Boise or feel connected to Boise? I can go first to kick us off. This is a really simple one, but honestly, my little weekend ritual has been lately to go and get a coffee from a local coffee shop. Last weekend, I went to Push and Pour on Latah, and I got an iced matcha because it was actually kind of warm last weekend, as you recall. And then went over to the Morris Hill Dog Park, which is one of my all-time favorite places these days. And I let my dog Daphne just have a ball and play with other dogs. And it's always funny because you end up like talking with other dog parents at the dog park and having moments with people there. So that's my recent moment, is just like loving our great local coffee shops and enjoying being outside with my dog at a dog park from the city of Boise. Blake, do you have one?
I'm really in love and kind of infatuated lately with various like mutual aid efforts that are happening in Boise. Because, we talk about the trust issue, and I think that people are really putting their heads down and helping each other out. Obviously, Boise Mutual Aid is one of those. The Boise Kitchen Collective, if people have not checked that out and like made some food for them, it's such a joy to go and drop it off and like talk to people and just kind of get to know, like just getting like kind of knee deep in your community in that way kind of makes me emotional of just like, we do have the ability to take care of each other. And I think people are really stepping up to do it. And it's really difficult. And I don't want to gloss over that. But yeah, just feeling a lot of love there right now.
Yeah, that's a really empowering one. I'm glad you shared that, Blake. George, what about you?
I don't want to follow Blake ever again. I mean, that was just amazing.
Right?
That was amazing. Blake, I was going to get serious. And then I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to get serious. Whenever I'm feeling sorry for myself or the state of the world, I know that I can get a Red Stripe beer and a bucket of popcorn and peanut M&Ms at the Flicks and just lay back and just like, okay, come on. And there's documentaries and foreign films and of course, the Oscar films too, but I love the Flicks whenever I'm feeling low.
Yeah. Oh, a good time at the Flicks over a weekend, especially. Just, have a moment to just be in front of something beautiful, some great art on the screen. I love that. And that's so George of you. I love that answer.
and a drink, right? Like alcohol. Yes.
Oh, God. Yeah, of course. That's the best part about it, right? Get some wine.
And their food is so good, too.
It is. It really
has
is.
no right to be as good as it is.
No right to be as good as it is. Okay, well, I'll see you both at the Flicks this weekend. And thank you so much for, coming on the show and digesting the news with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So what's your latest moment of joy in Boise? It can be big or small. We want to hear it. Send us an email and we might share your story on a future episode. Email boise@citycast.fm. Or you can leave us a voicemail. We love hearing from you. call 208-546-9485. And while you're at it, just add us to your contacts. Our music is by All the Kimonos and local band Up As the Down Is The. The show's produced by Evelyn Avitia, and Blake Hunter writes our daily Hey Boise newsletter. Emma Arnold will be back in the host chair on Monday, and I'm Frankie Barnhill, lead producer of the show. Have a good one, Boise.